Another thing that I see that holds people back from compassion is clinical perfectionism.
Mhm.
Do you want to, and basically getting stuck in, if I let go of my perfectionistic standards, then I'm not going to be able to maintain the excellence that I expect out of myself. And you started to say a little bit about how people are afraid that they won't be able to, they'll have to drop their standards, but I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about clinical perfectionism.
Mhm. Um, well, I think a lot of what I know about clinical perfectionism I learned from you, so I don't know if this will be a review. Um, but I think there's a difference between the ideal of wanting to do well, or the value of wanting to do well, and the strategy, as you've often called it, of perfectionism, which is kind of an ineffective strategy to try to do well at something that you care about. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. I did have a thought about that from her session. Um,
I can also jump off from here if you want. Um,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, so I definitely see perfectionism as being a problem of strategy, not of outcome. And I really appreciate everything you were saying about how compassion opens us up to curiosity and kind of learning from our mistakes. And I think I would just take it to the next point that I would make about it is for those minds that are basically constantly coming up with a strategy that they think would be perfect, it often
Mhm.
becomes rigid and narrow and not flexible, inflexible. And so it's not just helping people understand that they're not gonna have to drop their standards, but it's also even trying to help them understand that their outcomes might even be better. So the type of person that is rigidly following rules, if you can relax into the uncertainty of not following the rule, you might
Mhm.
find that there's actually other solutions to whatever problem you're trying to solve, and you can delegate to other people or collaborate with other people, and then your outcome is actually better. So you're not saying, well, if I'm not perfectionistic, then I just don't care. It's really saying that striving to rigidly follow rules or thinking that every mistake is catastrophic, thinking that everything is as important as everything else, repeating things until they feel just right. These are all um, aspects of clinical perfectionism that tend to actually make people's performance lower, and
Mhm.
people that engage in those kind of behaviors actually tend to procrastinate more. Like procrastination and
Yeah.
perfectionism are two sides of the same coin. So the way to fight perfectionism would be to try to prioritize things that you value. Like not everything is as important as everything else, and some things can be done at 50% or 75%.
Mhm.
To experiment, to take risks rather than rigidly following rules, to watch out for diminishing returns. So when you're doing something for so long that you're no longer getting the outcome that you're wanting, or the difference between 97% and 100% is like not necessarily worth it. And
Yeah.
then also using like conscientious models, so using other people that whose work ethic you value or whose performance you value as a barometer for when you might
Mhm.
be able to stop or reprioritize certain tasks. Those are all things that come to mind for me related to perfectionism.
Yeah, all of that is makes sense to me, and it's reminding me of a part of your session. I think it was in the first session with Nicole, where you were asking her, like, when did she first start to notice, ways that her mind is working differently from other people that before she didn't realize was unique to her. And she brought up the example of work and work assignments or work presentations that she would spend a lot of time preparing for, so much so that she might neglect, social time or exercise or things like that. And I thought that was such a good example of how worry can trick us when we are aware that something is important to us. And it's, was really clear that doing well at work was important to her. She really cared about, doing well in these presentations or projects. But worry kind of tricks us and says, well, if this is important to you, why aren't you working on it constantly, And it kind of brings that urgency up. And it can actually feel kind of scary to step away from that, it can feel like an exposure, to take a way of thinking about it from anxiety work, can feel like an exposure to take a step away from rehearsing the presentation and to go for a run. And I think that it's really great that she was brave and kind of flexible to try some of those strategies and to step away from it and to see that her performance was probably as good or even better because she was doing these other self-care things that were not just about kind of staying on that track of rehearsing or reviewing.
Yeah, I totally agree that she offered a great example of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And I think the paradox here and for many people is that they're afraid to give up the uncertainty of it. So if they have something due or a presentation coming up, many perfectionists will prepare until the last minute, feeling like it's too uncertain to not continue
Yeah.
to prepare, when in fact, if you instead give yourself time to rest, to do other self-care behaviors, you're more likely to be able to work in the same way or engage in whatever activity that you're doing perfectionistically. You're more able to do that at a high level in the long term. So I think
Mm-hmm.
actually to summarize, there's kind of two different topics we're discussing here. One of them is noticing your self-criticism and treating yourself with more compassion, especially when you're thinking that you're making mistakes where you might not even be making mistakes. You might just be learning and growing. And the other one is watching out in your behavior for when your behavior is anxiety driven and perfectionism driven, where
Mm-hmm.
you're having trouble not doing things in a rigid way or doing things too urgently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great points.